It's a tricky one, actually. I've been thinking about this. I had an argument about it a couple of weeks ago when it was first announced, and there are things that I think to be said, disregarding the fact it's Radiohead and whether you like them or not. There are certain aspects to it which are interesting. I think it's kind of coloured slightly in the fact that Radiohead has sold millions of albums, so it's quite easy for them to give away what they do. And I think for me, as an artist, I mean, we're successful and we've sold a lot of records, and I think that for less successful artists, it's actually not a very attractive thing, because it almost it's essentially saying that what you do isn't what is worth what someone else decides it's worth. And I think that for me, it's horribly close to like the idea of modern art, whereby there's intrinsically nothing of worth in it. The worth is given to the piece by the person who sees it. And for me, that flies in the face of everything I believe in to do with art, because I invest a huge amount of time and effort into creating something, and I think it is worth something. So
do you not actually see it as more fundamentally cynical? That I think there's a really big there's a thing there where a lot of people, especially Radiohead fans, will have a one-upmanship between themselves. Say, well, actually, I paid £12 for it.
No, but I think with disregarding the fact it's Radiohead, I mean, if you concentrate on the fact it's Radiohead, it's a different kind of argument, because.
But it's not them. Any fan of any group will have a one-upmanship between that commune, and they will congregate down the pub wherever or at a concert and say, right, I paid £12 for that.
That's an aspect of it.
Actually, I paid £13.
But fundamentally,
so they take their quids in.
Yeah, but fundamentally, right? I mean, there's two things. If you concentrate on the fact it's Radiohead and they're a successful band, they don't really care if everyone pays a penny. It doesn't really matter. They're going to release it anyway on a CD. So if you're being cynical or actually being more realistic, they're doing it because they're generating an awful lot of publicity. We're talking about it. It's worked. Essentially that's a huge reason of why they've done it. Not being too cynical, but fundamentally that there's a discussion which it generates, which is about what is art worth, and I think. See, funny enough, right, I'm not name dropping, but I had this discussion with David Bowie, one of the very few coherent conversations I've ever had with another artist, and he believes that art is invested with worth by the person who either listens to it or sees it or appreciates it, and I disagree. I think that to be an artist, you have to believe that what you do is worth something, otherwise there's no point in doing it. I think it was like, I don't think I'm an artist, therefore I get a plate and I put it on the floor, and if you think it's worth £10, give me £10, you can have it. It's a nonsense. I mean, because that isn't art. I don't think, you're moving into a very, very difficult discussing art. I mean, it is, it's an ongoing discussion, but I essentially feel that if you can create something and you do something in such a way that it moves other people and it engages them, that is intrinsically worth something. And so I think if you are prepared to put a price on it, there's nothing wrong with that. I can value what The Cure do. CDs are overpriced, they always have been, but I think that I don't feel comfortable with saying to you, this is what we do, and for this amount of money, it's yours. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's like, I don't expect someone to come and collect my dustbin and to ask me how much I think it's worth. It's a ludicrous. If you extrapolate it into like the wider world, it is actually totally bizarre. It's superficially, it's a great way of wow. What an interesting idea. I think once you start to investigate it as a kind of a way of working in the music business, it just falls apart. What do you do if you're an unknown band? I mean, there are some bands that give their music away in order that people get to know who they are, and they play shows and they sell T-shirts, but they're still essentially what Radiohead I think are missing, if we're going back to them in particular, that it's a commercial enterprise. If they're giving the music away, that's something else. But if they're actually asking you to value it, they've moved into an area where I think that
they are putting the onus on the buyer.
I don't know. I mean, it would help, I suppose, if we liked them more. I know. Unfortunately, Keith downloaded it yesterday for a penny.
Did he?
Yeah. But I don't know. No, I suppose, being fair, it's an interesting discussion, and they're not the first people to do it, but they're the most prominent people to do it. And I suppose it will start people kind of like questioning how, I mean, the internet has like raised a lot of questions like that, and I think the less power that record companies have is probably a good thing, actually. But but there has to be a coherency to it all, and there's something worrying at the heart of it, and I think it's that if you're successful, and we can give away our album if we want, it doesn't really make that much difference. We can still go around the world and play shows, and so it's not going to impact too much. If it was our first album, I'd be very reluctant to let people decide what it's worth, because I think it was the best thing. I think what we're doing now is the best thing we've ever done. I'm not going to let someone else. They can judge whether they like it or not, but they can't value it. Not from my point of view, anyway. Anyway. But yeah, it's an interesting discussion.
Never actually see us as successful, to see us as us. I think we live in such an insular world. Yesterday, doing the NTV Awards was very, very bizarre. Obviously, like Robert is very iconic and and noticeable. And Jason and I would sort of like stand up at the end of this red carpet thingy and looking down, and it was like odd thing, really odd thing to see, because usually when the Cure work, we work in such an insular environment that for that to be exposed, which Robert is obviously, Robert, they're going to see him, and it's like you think, Christ, that is so bizarre, because we just don't deal with that from a day-to-day working environment within the group.
It's this difficult concept, success, really, because I think if we were talking about us being successful, it would be in terms of whether we think what we do is good. Because when we started out, we didn't think we were going to be successful. I mean, when we were younger...
Yeah, I know. See, I disagree, because before I joined the band, when I used to see it, I knew that Cure would be successful. There was never, to my mind, there was never any doubt about that. Because out of all those bands that used to play around that environment,
I know what you mean. We don't measure what we do in terms of us being like a successful band. I think we should be more successful, to be honest. You know that. Of course we fucking should. It's like, we're better than most other bands. It galls me when I see some of the fucking idiots that are successful, commercially. But being serious, it doesn't really bother me that much. I don't lose sleep about it, because I think that the Cure have been far more successful commercially than I ever thought. I didn't ever think we'd be this popular. And the fact that we've had the longevity that we've had, I think, is actually a much more important gauge of success. Like, going back to the idea of art, the true test of art is time. And I think that the fact that we're still around and doing what we do means much more than someone who sells 10 million copies of their first album. I mean, that's not sour grapes, because we sold a lot of records. It's just, if I'd been given the choice at 17, will you still be able to do this when you're 47, or would you like to sell 20 million copies of your first album and then you have to give up because everyone thinks you're an idiot? I would have chosen the first option, because it's much better to know that what you're doing has value. And going back to that again, I don't measure what we do most of the time against what other people do. I don't think if someone's got to number one and we haven't, I have a passing moment where I think, you bastards, but it doesn't really matter, because it's, I think, well, in 5 years ago, I think if we still want to be doing this in 5 years, I hope we can, and the fact that we are means a lot more to me than if we're number one around the world. It would be nice to have both, but maybe we should give our album away. God, what a road to Damascus moment. Of course we're not going to give